Serendipity is putting a quarter in the gumball machine and having 3 pieces come out rattling instead of 1, all red. It's a quote from Peter H. Reynolds. So you're thinking, what does this quote have to do with a sewing and quilting show? Today, I have the good fortune of featuring how unique fabrics, friendly techniques, and clever designs combine into one wardrobe. It's so serendipity. I'd like you to meet Kay Witt. Kay is a designer and author who has a talent for making discoveries while sewing. Kay, I like your fresh ideas. They're just what I needed to spark my wardrobe.
Well, thanks, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, serendipitous sewing occurs when you're looking for one group of fabrics and you find something completely different. And that's exactly what happened with the applique skirt. Ruching and sequins are not generally paired with linen, yet the chance meeting of the technique, fabrics, and trim is a fateful combo.
So serendipity, that's what's next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
We're starting with a very basic skirt pattern, and then you'll see as we progress through this program, we'll add details. But this basic skirt is almost all straight stitching.
Yes, it is. And actually, before you get started on that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2/3, 1/3 rule here that's showing in this particular design. What I like to do is choose a neutral fabric for the upper part of the skirt and then show a punch of color along the bottom. Now you could look at that from the other standpoint and think, well, I could put the pop of color at the top, but it really works so much better and is more visually pleasing if it's along the bottom.
And the basic pattern that we're working with today has some cut lines that you can choose, 2/3, 1/3, and there's a center panel, a side skirt, and then a lower section for the punch of color, and all straight seams.
That's right.
A little bit later in the program, I'll be showing you just the simple sewing detail of putting in a zipper, an invisible zipper, so that again is another straight seam. So you can see the construction is easy, but you added a little bit of serendipity to this skirt by combining ruching and sequins.
I did. You know, because I keep the sewing so simple, I really love to come in and add details that make it special. So on this particular one, I chose to use a strip of ruching. And the way that we get started on that is you take a strip of fabric about 2 inches wide, folded right sides together, sewn with a scant 1/4 inch seam, and then we turn the tube right side out.
And you can use one of your favorite techniques to turn this right side out, but we're just going to use one of these turners I've used many times on Sewing with Nancy, wrapping the end around the opening of the tube, and then there's a little wire that has a pigtail right on the side here that goes into the end, wrap it around and invert it. And there we go, a little magic show right to turn the ruching.
That's wonderful.
Now we can use this for tubing, but for ruching, you can have it wide, you can have it narrow. You've done some hand stitching.
I have. Notice that the seam is centered down the back side of the tube, just so that we don't have to deal with the bulk of the seam to one side or the other. And some of the ruching has already been completed here. I like to just eyeball my stitching, but there is a handy tool that can be purchased to mark your lines, and you would basically just line it up on the strip and mark along the edge here.
The big zigzag.
Of the big zigzag.
Or just eyeball it too, as you mentioned.
Or just eyeball it, like I like to do. One of the most important things I think about ruching when you begin is that you want your stitches to be large. So you want to do a large running stitch. And as I'm coming around here to complete yet another angle on this stitching, I'm going to come in from the back.
So that the thread goes over the fold.
Right, it wraps right over that fold. And then I'm going to continue across.
Let's just show our viewers the stitching there. Very good. And then you'd wrap it around the...
That's right. So because I've ended here on the back, I'm going to start now from the front, which will cause the thread to then wrap
And then,
around the
as you might guess, with that double
of that.
thread, you're just going to
begin to
gather it.
gather it. And it resembles rickrack, I think. And you could pull it as tightly or as loosely as you'd like.
Then we have a sample skirt here that has been sewn the front, and you have made a design. I'll let you add the final flair to this.
I actually just do sort of a freelance, sort of just a fun little, fancy little curve.
And then after pinning it down, here you can see a close-up of just stitching right through the middle of the ruching with this extra long stitch. And then you finish this, Kay, as we mentioned earlier, with just a touch of sequins.
That's right, and that's the only handwork that's required for this skirt. Just a few little sequins to add a special sparkle.
So Serendipity, a combination of fabrics, elements, and fast techniques. Following Kay's great sewing techniques and combinations of fabrics and trim, we want to spend less time on construction and more time on auditioning fabric and adding embellishment. So the invisible zipper fits the bill perfectly, where the seam and the zipper are almost in one. We're going to add the zipper before sewing the center back seam for the skirts. You can buy invisible zippers of a variety of lengths, or I happen to like to use them on a roll, so I have lots of zipper pulls with yards of zippers, and we've used these on Sewing with Nancy before. And you bar tack about an inch above the tape and 1 inch again, so that you can cut the zipper tape apart, and then you have a zipper. Make it whatever length you'd like between your bar tacks. Make sure you have one zipper pull in that section. Probably the most important step of working with this zipper is pressing, to press the coil flat. Otherwise, you will not have an invisible piece or a zipper look. And the zipper coil, you're going to press it from the wrong side, is just flattened out. I'll press it out this way. And it may not seem to make a lot of difference, but trust me, this will make all the difference in the world. Now, my small sample, I'm going to be sewing the seam after, as I mentioned, after sewing the zipper into place. So I have my two samples of the skirt back laid out, and I'm going to be placing with the tab of the zipper pulled down, and I'm going to be meeting right sides together. So the selvage of the zipper, the finished edge of the zipper, is next to the fabric edge. Now, in Kay's design, she has designed these so that the seam allowances of the patterns are 1/2 inch. So this is a very workable, since this width of the zipper tape is just scant of 1/2 inch. Now, as I'm sewing, the invisible zipper foot coil is going right next to that pressed section. And I just sew right to just about to the end, as far as I can go. And then cut the threads, raise the presser foot, and now I have both sides of my skirt back. Now I'm going to flip it once to expose the zipper pull, and then flip it one more time so that I have right sides together. You have a little twist and turn way at the end of the zipper. At the top, I want to make certain that I have about the same length of fabric, amount of fabric at the top, and I'm going to scoot it down just a touch. And I'm going to sew from the same direction. I think that's very important, that you sew from the bottom, or the top, excuse me, to the bottom of the zipper area. And again, because I pressed the coil flat, it's easy to stitch right next to the coil. Now, if all goes well, and as I pull this up, I'll show you that the zipper, hopefully, will be concealed right in that seam. You can't even see where the zipper tape is positioned, but obviously we have to close up the lower portion of the center back seam, or wherever you're going to be placing your zipper. We can use the same foot and just conveniently move the foot over to the far left so that the needle is clearing the foot. Now, Kay's pattern has 1/2 inch seam allowances, a really easy measurement. So I'm going to align this at the 1/2 inch mark. And so I'm stitching 1/2 inch from the area, and then stitch And now as I get, you might want to pin, but I'm just going to kind of finger pin. Fold the tape out of the way, the zipper tape out of the way, and I'm going to do my best to end stitching right at the zipper spot. Cut the threads, and we'll see how well I did. You might want to do this stitch a basting stitch if you are not quite familiar with this at first, but I think I did pretty well. So you may want to tack or make that secure, and then finish the top as usual. A great way of putting in a zipper. Providence brought these 3 fabrics together, called a stroke of luck or good fortune, yet finding and combining the prints could easily be called serendipitous. Next, learn how to make similar discoveries when you're sewing. The next step that we have is that same basic skirt pattern, but this time, Kay, you didn't use the contrast panel on the hem area.
No, I didn't. I used a longer cutting line on the pattern piece.
And then added some trim with ruffles.
That's right. And we also added a nice pocket.
Interesting color combinations, and we're going to be discussing how to combine fabrics in our next segment, but I so enjoy the way you have worked with fabric colors
Well, thank you, Nancy.
and prints.
We're going to be looking at the pocket piece now. Notice that it has an angled top, and we've added a 2-inch strip that's been ruffled with a ruffler attachment every 6th stitch.
Or you could gather it.
Or you could gather
Right.
it, or you could add a nice piece of trim. And then it's added to the top and bottom sections of the pocket. The pocket is then sewn right sides together along the top and bottom edges with a 1/4-inch seam.
And turned inside out.
That's right.
And then just simply placed on that panel, and what a fast pocket.
Yes, very fast.
Very fast, I like it. And you can see here we have the front and the 2 side panels. In the back you'd put the invisible zipper, just like I demonstrated, a waistband, and you could leave it like this, or we had the ruffle.
That's right. We've got a great ruffle here.
And if you look at the finished skirt, I didn't get this the first time I glanced at this skirt because it's a double ruffle.
That's right. That way you don't have to hem it. Once you've added it to the skirt, you're finished.
And it has a nice weight so that the skirt,
Hangs nicely. Yes.
great idea. Now the fabric sections are cut about 3 inches each. We have the main ruffle, this will be the accent piece, and then the other ruffle. And you're going to cut these a lot longer.
Of course. They're going to be with 2 strips with the fabric sewn together so that you have plenty to gather and
Sure.
add.
And then here it has been sewn together. The seam allowance is pressed to the center.
Yes.
And imagine a long strip, and then you'd meet right sides.
And again, I like to gather it with my ruffler foot.
Now, ruffler foot is really quite an unusual contraption. I think that's the good word for it. And you can have settings at the top to have it gather a ruffle every 1st, 6th, 12th stitch, or every stitch, and we're going to set it at number 6. And here's a close-up of how this works, where you feed the folded fabric and it tucks it every 6th stitch to give a very even ruffle. And Kay, here's your ruffle.
That's right. This one has been gathered every 6th stitch, and what we're going to do now is put some intentional creases in it. This is something that I love to do. It gives a flatter appearance to the gathers. So what I typically do is just try to position it in such a way and then press.
We have the 4-handed pressing here.
Yes, we do. That's awfully handy to get those intentional creases.
And they don't have to be perfect.
Not at all. Not at all. You're just wanting a nice flat appearance.
Now, even though this is a double ruffle, Kay takes a sewing shortcut at the center back.
I do, because I, want this to be math friendly, and the strips are certainly longer than what you need. What I like to do is start at the center back. We'll pretend this is the center back
Right sides
seam
together.
Of the skirt. And what I do is I start stitching about 2 inches away from the center back seam, go all the way around and stop 2 inches short. And then you leave yourself some extra to overlap, fold it back, mark, get that ruffle nice and straight, mark that crease in there on each side. Then you're going to match up those markings
And stitch.
and stitch. So here's your completed seam, and I've trimmed down my extra. Notice that we still have this hole. So you have to complete the stitching.
And then when you're completed, then you bring it back up and you can hardly find the seam.
That's right.
It's right in this area, and even though it's double, no one will ever be the wiser that you haven't finished it all.
That's right. And then I press my seam toward the skirt and double top stitch.
A fast way of creating a very youthful looking and fun skirt to wear.
Yes. Combining prints, fabrics, and colors can lead to fascinating discoveries. The large-scale floral print with bold geometric contrasting fabric was destined to coordinate with a silk ruffle and rose embellishment. Here's how I make serendipitous discoveries with fabric.
When you look at the fabric combination, or at least when I first looked at it, I thought, I don't think I would have initially placed the rose and the geometric shape together, but it certainly works. And why don't you give us a little preview, Kay, of how you audition fabrics and decide what 3 fabrics to put together?
Okay. Well, like you said, you know, it is unusual to put a geometric like that with a rose, but it really makes such an impact. Here I have a selection of fabrics, and you can see that they could all work together in one way or another. And what I like to do is play with fabric. So what I do a lot of times is I'll throw them out on my workspace and see what grabs me. And so here, you know, you could put, let's say, this floral with this stripe, and let's try it with this dot. Now,
It's okay.
it's okay, but it's not exciting. So let's throw this one in. Well, that doesn't do anything either, really, now because you've got too many backgrounds that are the same tone. So let's try this fabric. Let's do something a little unexpected here. Let's put it with this green and white check. And then put this dot in here. Now, probably what I would do
Yes, very nice.
is have this here, and use this little trim here, this little fabric here as my trim and my rose. And that brings in the darker values in this fabric, but still has a lightness to it that this one just doesn't do for it.
So take time to audition your fabrics. You may
Do.
have things in your stash that you might want to take to your fabric store. But as we look at another color combination, you can see another option that Kay has, and that we have the small little 2-inch ruffle that is this time placed in the seam. Again, the ruffle at the band at the bottom, another lower ruffle. And then what we had on this skirt, which I think is really just the perfect little accent, is
a silk rose.
a silk rose. How about that?
Yeah.
And the silk rose was made by cutting a 2-inch length of fabric and folding it in half, and then doing the ruffling again.
That's right. And on this time, with the ruffler foot, we'll set it at every stitch, because we want a tighter gather this time.
So again, here you can see how that foot now is biting the fabric at every stitch to get a very tight ruffle.
That's right.
And then when you drop the foot, that's where it goes. It's a great foot, and it works on a variety of machines, low shank and high shank machines. And here is our ruffle.
Yes. And to make this rose, what I would do is turn the corner down and then begin rolling up the fabric strip. And you can see the rose coming to life.
And it could be made for an embellishment or on your jacket, which we'll show on the next, like you're wearing for the next program, or then just hand stitching it into place.
Exactly.
So for this particular skirt, we used the same pattern piece, this time the full length of the pattern piece and the full length of, or the full width of the band across the bottom. And that extra band across the bottom really adds some punch to it. That's where your eye is drawn, plus the great seams.
Yes.
So Kate, fantastic combination of fabrics and techniques, which can really turn our sewing from blah to serendipitous.
That's right.
Today's Nancy's Corner story has a very interesting plot. A Friday night in a high school gymnasium, over 100 preteens, teens, and family members armed with scissors, thread, and sewing machines. It's not a common scenario, yet an ideal scene for a community service lock-in. I'd like you to welcome Laura Shaneke. Laura is a youth leader in Dodge County, Wisconsin, and one of the members who spearheaded this very worthy project. Laura, thanks for being on Sewing with Nancy.
Thank you very much for having me here.
You're welcome. And I gave you a call because I heard about this great sewing event on a Friday night from 6 to 11 with kids and family, and it just didn't happen just like that.
No, there was obviously a lot of planning that went into this event, a lot of pre-planning, a lot of purchasing beforehand, and making sure we had all the projects ready so that our youth could be successful in their endeavors.
And soon our viewers are going to find out all the things that you made, but you wrote a grant to get funds to buy the fabric.
Correct. Our initial, funding for this came from a grant from Wisconsin 4-H Foundation, and that was something that I applied for. We also received funding from our local Dodge County 4-H, as well as individual organizations that chose to sponsor us.
Well, this event, as you'll soon see, raised lots of awareness and produced great projects to give away.
Very true. This is one of the projects we made. I guess this is probably the most common, even though it's not sewing based, very fabric based.
Yes.
We made many no-sew blankets, and what we had with this is we had a lot of youth involved in the purchasing and planning of fabric.
Sure.
They learned a lot about comparison shopping and which types of fabric are best. Would you rather have polar or non-polar, that sort of thing. And they're also involved in the making, obviously. We had our younger members especially help with the tying of the blankets, and older members and adults worked with the cutting of the fabric.
Now these blankets are going to be given away. That's the whole point.
Yes, very much so, community service. And for this particular project, we actually received funding from the Shop with the Cops program in Dodge County 4-H.
Shop
in Dodge
with the
County,
Cops,
yes. And they gave us money to buy the fabric because they requested these for their program. So we made them on behalf of Shop with the Cops.
Great idea. And then you had leftovers. I like this idea.
Of course. We had, as you know, when working with polar fleece, there's selvages on the edge, and that looks a little bit funny when you've got it just kind of hanging on. So something we had all of our helpers use, we had them cut off the selvages, and if sometimes the fabric was a little bit too long on one side.
Sure.
And then we made dog toys out of them for our local Humane Society.
Great thing for a Humane Society that could be wherever in the country,
yes.
right?
And making it out of basically nothing, so a good way to give it that away.
Now this idea, this is a therapy bag that made with a hand towel, and inside are channels filled with rice.
Yes.
And what a great project. And dads, you were telling me, were sewing,
Yes,
and guys.
We had, not all of our 4-H members are girls, obviously, so we had a lot of boys there, and they weren't exactly sure what they were getting into, I don't think, but they went home knowing how to sew. And yes, we had a lot of our members help sew these as well. They started obviously with the inside bags, and then we had our particularly younger members fill the channels with rice, which they thought was just amazing.
Sure.
And then we also had a lot of members working to sew these covers for them. And they learned a lot about having to work with the tension of a machine sewing on such thick fabric.
Now, speaking of machines, sewing requires just a little knowledge of sewing machines,
yes.
and then you had adult leaders that were there to assist.
Yes, we did.
And you did a lot of pre-work in organizing the stations.
Correct. Each of these different activities went on at a different station. So what went with that is we had an adult leader and a youth leader, at least one of each, at each station. And the people working with that were then responsible for making sure that station went smoothly.
Sure.
And for the sewing stations in particular, we had adult helpers there to make sure we could fix our sewing machines when they were broken, and rethread needles, and fix needles when they broke, and all that sort of thing.
And then these will go to nursing homes.
Correct. This is another item where we received a request from several Dodge County nursing homes to make these. And so they actually didn't give us funding for them, but
And that's
made
what
them
your grant was
nonetheless.
for,
Yes, very
to buy
true.
this. And then people were able to, 4-H kids were able to deliver these.
Yes, they went in, the clubs went and gave them to the nursing homes.
Full circle.
Yes.
And one of the quick last projects we're going to talk about, pillowcases.
This, we received funding from Operation Military Kids, which is another program local in Wisconsin. And what we did with this is we used the fabric, and we took a yard of fabric and then made a pillowcase out of it. And these are used again for the Operation Military Kids program for children whose parents are currently deployed.
Great opportunities. Laura, inspiring what you and your fellow 4-H people have done. If you would like to have information on how to work with this type of project, you can go to the sewingwithnancy.com website, click under Nancy's Corner. Under the 2400 series, you'll find information about Dodge County and Laura's group and how they work together. Laura, thank you for being our guest. I appreciate this greatly, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.
Haywood's fully illustrated Sew Serendipity book, including a full-size, multi-sized pattern, serves as the reference for this two-part series. It's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2407. Order item number Z4958. Sew Serendipity. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Classe Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.